I'll tell you what's a little scary, and I don't know whether it's because I'm starting to feel old or simply because it's a decade, but this car, the Audi Q7, and of course this particular Q7 is an SQ7, but the Audi Q7 is not far off celebrating a decade on sale in Australia. Think about that for a second. It's gone by in the blink of an eye. I remember driving the original launch version of this car. And on that point, when the Q7 was first released in Australia, a lot of Aussies went, well, it's an Audi, it's cool, it's got lots of technology, I like the idea of it, but the styling's a bit bulbous, it's rounded, it's quite big. Aussies didn't love it. However, now, I think a decade later, it's aged particularly well. The styling updates, new wheel designs, new grille designs, lighting, things like that have really changed the appearance of the Q7 and the SQ7 that we're looking at here. And now, this is a sharp and stylish large SUV in the Audi range, and crucially, this is a pillar of Audi's continued success in Australia because we know that Aussies love large SUVs. The Q7 is exactly that. There's been some updates for this version that we're about to go through in a minute. I'm really looking forward to driving it because, of course, any Audi with an S in the badge is going to be fun to drive. First up, let's take a look at pricing. We will run through the Q7 range as well as SQ7, and because there's a lot to break down, we will throw SQ8 in as well. And then after we take a look at pricing, it's inside the cabin to have a look at some of the changes in there. Audi's 4-litre twin-turbo petrol V8 is a powerhouse, and it's matched to an 8-speed Tiptronic automatic. The engine makes 373 kilowatts and 770 newton metres, and both SQ7 and SQ8 take just 4.1 seconds to get from 0 to 100 kilometres an hour. As is the case with the coupe SUV craze, certainly in terms of metal, you pay more for a bit less, with the SQ8 starting from $178,815 before on-road costs. The SQ7 starts from $174,815 before on-road costs. Both variants are incredibly close in all areas as you'd expect, but interestingly, the SQ7 is slightly more frugal than the SQ8, using 11.8 litres per 100 kilometres to the 8's 11.9 litres per 100 kilometres. SQ7's standard specification list is lengthy, with highlights being tyre pressure monitoring, 22-inch Audi Sport alloy wheels, red painted brake calipers, sports adaptive air suspension, dynamic steering package, carbon trimmed exterior rear view mirrors, soft closed doors, specific body kit, sports front seats with cooling, and aluminium look trim inside the cabin. The SQ7 we drove at launch had some alluring options added to the starting price, including the dynamic package, which brings active roll stabilisation, and the sensory package, which brings not just quality to the audio system, but comfort in the form of heated outboard second row seats, among other features. Add a trailer hitch, contrasting interior stitching, high-gloss black exterior trim, and HD matrix LED lights, and your SQ7 will creep over the $200,000 mark to $209,215 before on-road costs. The SQ7 is, of course, a 3-row SUV, while the SQ8 is a 2-row layout. SQ7 gets more storage, of course, too, with 793 litres available behind the second row of seats, while the SQ8 has 605 litres available. There's no doubt that Audi has hit the nail on the head for a long time now when it comes to premium cabins and the inclusions. If you've test-driven a Q7 before, you'll be familiar with the dynamic driver's display, you'll be familiar with the screen layouts. Stepping up to SQ7, you get things like different aluminium trim, you get cooled seats as well as sports seats, which I think are important for this specification vehicle. Obviously, very, very comfortable, but also driver-focused, and it does feel sporty because don't forget this is a large SUV, but it should still feel sporty for the driver, I think. Audi's nailed that brief. The other thing that I think Audi's done particularly well that I really like, the driver's display is configurable, so you can set it up however you want to set it up. Very simple steering wheel controls and switches, so that's not too complex. And then the 2 layers of screens here. I love the fact that infotainment, whether you're using Android Auto or Apple CarPlay or just the regular native system, is all controlled through that screen there. And then the functionality of the vehicle, so things like stop, start, air conditioning, all the climate control stuff, that's down there. And then, of course, crucially, a regular dial for the volume button. So if you're barreling down the highway at 110, you just reach over here, find the volume button, don't have to take your eyes off the road. This is a beautiful cabin, really premium, put together really nicely. And it's a lovely car to drive, sure, but the feeling that you get from inside the cabin, whether you're the driver or passenger, it's really first rate. Before we go for a drive, let's take a look at the second row, because for a large SUV, we're going to talk a lot about how good this thing is to drive, but for a large SUV, practicality, comfort, space is first and foremost one of the things that Australian buyers are looking at. That's my driving position. Even with a pretty focused sports seat, I've got plenty of room back here. Not an issue with that at all. Lots of headroom as well. Shoulder room too. You can fit 3 adults across this second row. Air vents, controls for the climate, all that sort of stuff. Huge sunshade and glass roof here. Sunroof at the front, but the size of it means there's a lot of light coming into the cabin, so it doesn't feel really dark and that you're hunkered down, I guess is a good way of saying it. It feels really open and airy back here, which is important if you're spending a lot of time in the car. And also for the kids, I mean, we always think about babies in baby capsules in the second row, and I love these things here, sun blinds, really practical. It makes you wonder why all manufacturers don't do it in every car. We think a lot about kids, as I said, in baby seats, but this is good too for adults who just don't want direct sun on them on a really hot day. But in short, if you're buying any kind of Q7, we're in an SQ7 now, but any kind of Q7, the second row and the space and functionality back here is integral, because if you're a family buyer, chances are kids, family members are going to be in this second row on longer road trips, and this is not a bad place to be. Now, our drive loop today is in the beautiful New South Wales Southern Highlands, and it's funny because this is exactly the kind of environment I can picture the Audi SQ7 living in. Someone who lives in the city but heads away into an area like this on the weekend with the family in tow and goes for a bit of a road trip. This is exactly the kind of place you'd expect people to be driving. Interestingly, we're out on country roads, obviously, pretty mismatched, uneven surfaces, and the suspension that is under this SQ7 is fantastic and does a very, very impressive job of ironing out even the worst surfaces. This car is riding on 22-inch wheels, so they are big rims, and it's got a lot of work to do. It's a heavy SUV, so the suspension does have to do a bit of work in order to ensure that it irons it out, but it's particularly comfortable in here. The engine is a monster. Twin turbo V8 petrol engine, 373 kilowatts, big numbers, big power, big torque, really, really good thing to drive. And crucially, and I think this is the real point to make, it makes this car feel effortless on any road, under any circumstances, under any throttle load. If you're rolling onto the freeway and you've got to get up to 110 or you've got to overtake, get up to speed quickly, the SQ7 just does it effortlessly, almost without even noticing that you're asking the engine to do it. Fantastic transmission. The driveline as a whole, Audi's Quattro system, we all know how good that is and how impressive it is. And this is just a lovely, lovely large SUV to drive. It really is. And as I said before, it's interesting that, and as you'll find us writing in reviews of the Q7, its most interesting facet is it kind of fills its own niche, and Audi Q7 buyers tend to say, I've looked at the market and I want to buy another Q7 if I've already got one, because this does exactly what I want it to do. So it's a large SUV with all of that practicality for family buyers and people who need to use it to get to and from work and to and from school or the gym or drop the kids off at sports training, whatever it might be, but also have an SUV that's capable of being driven in a spirited fashion that you can have some fun with. I just think that's a real point to make with the SQ7, because this is a fun SUV as much as it's a practical SUV. Will you love it if you buy one? Absolutely you will. There's no doubt about that. And I think the choice between SQ7 and SQ8 will come just down to practicality. Do you want the extra room and practicality that an SQ7 affords, or would you be better served not necessarily having that extra practicality, but really going for the stylish SQ8? That's the question you'll have to answer. In terms of how this drives, though, it's just a fantastic car to drive on any road. It really never raises a sweat anywhere. The cabin ergonomics, the sense of insulation, there's very little wind noise. Not a lot of road noise either from those 22-inch tyres, only on really nasty coarse chipped surfaces, and it just gives you that relaxed, comfortable, enjoyable experience inside the cabin, which I think is crucial, especially for those of you who go on longer road trips. And Q7's interesting because despite being a luxury SUV, you do see a lot of them out on the open road, on road trips. You see a lot towing as well. Not just things like horse floats or jet skis or boats, but caravans as well. So you see a lot of them out on the open road being used as touring vehicles, and the quality of the cabin experience, I think, is integral to that. Fantastic thing to drive. Cabin feels amazingly premium, really well put together. Great choice of materials, little luxuries like heated and cooled seats, and fantastic controls that feel premium as well. So I think if you're looking at a Q7, if your budget extends to an SQ7, you're going to buy this SUV and you're absolutely going to love it. And lastly, the other thing of note that this vehicle seems to be able to do is to hide its weight. If you put your foot down, it accelerates like a sports car. Not a bad soundtrack either as well, but it accelerates more like a sports car than a large SUV. And things like the braking, the steering, the balance, the way the front end behaves when you push it into a corner, it tends to hide its weight. It doesn't really feel as heavy as it is. It doesn't feel big. I know you've probably heard this term before or read it in reviews, that a car that might seem to be big to start with, as you drive it, it shrinks around you. And that term might get used a little bit too often, but the SQ7 really is one of those vehicles. It feels a lot lighter than it is, and that makes it fun to drive as well. But I think things like the steering and the braking really do come in for special mention, because it's not easy to inject fun into the driving experience with a large SUV. Audi's managed to do it before with the SQ7, and they've certainly done it again and maintained the status quo with this version of the SQ7. Well, surprise, surprise, the Audi SQ7 is a fantastic SUV to drive. It's an Audi, it's got an S in the badge, it's got an incredible powertrain. I guess that is the least surprising thing I would have said in this video review, that it's actually really impressive to drive. You probably expected that. I think the most important thing though is existing buyers of Q7s, whether it's a regular Q7 or an SQ7, tend to tell us, the feedback we get is the only thing that does what they want them to do is another Q7. So if you've already got an Audi Q7 and you're looking at this model, it's different enough that you're going to feel like you've got a new car. I think that's important. Tell you what I'd love to see from you guys though is, would you buy an SQ7 or would you buy an SQ8? Would you pick practicality of SQ7 or styling of SQ8? Because there's a subtle difference there to dissect. So let us know which one you would pick in the comments section below. According to Audi, interestingly, it's somewhere between 60-40 and 70-30, the split, in the favour of the SQ7 over the SQ8. So that's quite interesting, because Australia is a very much style-conscious market, but SQ7 is definitely a slightly more practical choice. Don't forget to hit like if you've enjoyed the video. Click on subscribe so you can stay up to date with all of our latest video content. And as always, the review of the new SQ7 and all of the other updated models from Audi, it's over at Drive.com.au.